being here. We have Lauren Patterson, who is the president and CEO of the New Canaan Community Foundation. You are part of an impressive group of women here, leaders in the community. We're excited to have you here. We're going to talk a little bit about your role in the community and get some good stories.
Great. Thank you for having me.
Tell me a little bit about your background. Let's start from the early days. You were born and raised in the New Jersey area, right? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yep. I grew up in northern New Jersey. Still have a lot of family there from my side and my husband's side. And really had a great childhood. Loved the town I grew up in. It's a lot like New Canaan.
Where'd you grow up?
Wyckoff, New Jersey.
Oh, sure.
Bergen County. Mm-hmm. And it's funny, there are a lot of New Jersey folks who are in Connecticut. New Canaan, when I came here, really reminded me of home. That's in a lot of ways.
You were in fencing in high school.
I was, yes.
Tell me about that.
Sure. Well, it's funny. I had a lot of outlets when I was younger. One was in the arts, and I was really never an athlete until I happened upon the sport of fencing in high school. It's a sport that is regional in nature, so very big sport in New Jersey, and then in different parts of the country. There's kind of clusters of fencing competition. So that was a great outlet for me, and I think something that was really important in just my personal development, being a part of a team sport and a really competitive sport.
Do you keep up with fencing now?
I don't.
Okay.
I know there are fencing clubs out there. I really, I didn't pursue it when I got to the collegiate level. That would have taken me in kind of a different direction. But I certainly love the competition of sport still.
The arts was important to you in high school as well. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. I mean, so thinking about my childhood, I was really relatively shy. And the arts was a real outlet for me. And it started actually in elementary school. I was sort of tapped for an arts program. And my parents really fostered that with me. I had access to every different medium that I could be possibly interested in tinkering with, and then took that through with me to college. So in college, I was a studio arts minor.
And where'd you go to college?
College of the Holy Cross in Massachusetts. And so I didn't take the arts into a practicing arts profession, if you will. But then when I just decided to pursue a professional career, it was really important to me to find a way to reflect that same interest. And that's where I became passionate about arts access.
I think that's so interesting at such a young age that you tapped into that really early on. I think that's so interesting.
Well, I think, I realized that I was fortunate to have at my fingertips programs, people, all the supplies I could ever need to explore that interest and what brought me out of my shell. And then when I looked around in the world and saw that wasn't the case in a lot of different neighborhoods that really weren't far from home, that's where I said, okay, arts access would be an important part to get involved in. That's actually what got me involved in the nonprofit sector. I was interested in arts access. I took an internship in DC that was at kind of a quasi-government organization.
And that was during college?
That was during college. It was the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities. And so I was helping individual artists apply for public dollars to do art installations, to do arts programming in under-resourced areas of the city. And that was my first exposure to grant making. So I had no idea the business side of what could help these arts programs happen, and that's where I was exposed to grant making and working in the community in that way.
So after Holy Cross, what was the next?
Next, I knew that I wanted to get back to DC, where I had been interning, and that's once I had that exposure at kind of a quasi-government grant-making agency, I got into community foundation work. Sort of the rest is history for me. So I worked at a community foundation in suburban Maryland for a number of years. Really loved that.
What was the name of that program?
Community Foundation for Montgomery County.
Okay.
So it was sort of an affiliate community foundation of a larger organization that worked throughout the Washington, D.C. region. And so I worked with donor families on their philanthropy. I worked on community grant-making initiatives. There was a lot of work at that time around response to the economic crisis at the time in 2008. There were some other kind of smaller grant-making programs that we supported, and I really loved it. I loved working in that particular role in a community. And so after that, I actually ended up working at a women's foundation.
That is interesting. Tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. So women's foundations are public foundations, like community foundations. They raise all the dollars from their community that they then reinvest in their work and the work of partner organizations in the community. The Women's Foundation, though, had a mission that solely focused on the economic security of women and girls.
And was this a national program or a local program?
It was local in nature, but just like there are hundreds of community foundations across the country, there are likewise women's foundations all over the country. So they work in some ways in a coordinated kind of national scale, but often they're focused on a region or a state or a particular neighborhood.
What would be the comparison here in Fairfield County? Is there a women's program?
There is a fund for women and girls, yes, in Fairfield County. Yep.
Oh, that's great. As you were living in Washington, tell us one really cool story about something that might have happened as you were interacting with maybe some donors or something like that.
I actually wasn't part of the Washington drama, which was actually very nice. So it was an interesting kind of tension between what you would hear in the national news and then what would be going on the local level. Yeah. So Washington is talked about in the news, but when you live there, you live in D.C. and you experience a neighborhood, and that I think was more so my experience.
So you weren't jaded. That's
no,
good.
I wasn't jaded.
Well, tell me, you've had some interesting mentors. It sounds like you always had female bosses, as I understand it.
Yeah.
Tell us how some of them really influenced you and guided you.
Yeah. I think, and this goes back from a young age, even in high school when I had internships or different jobs, I've always had women bosses. Mm-hmm. And I think I didn't even realize it until there was a string of them in a row, and I said, I've really never worked for a man. It was, but it was nice that it was remarkable, and it took looking back to realize it because it wasn't strange to me. And that's a generational difference. Mm-hmm. And it does have something to do with the fields that I've worked in. But I think that's remarkable that it has all been women leaders in my life and as an example. And they've also been very just strong and unapologetic in their leadership role. I saw them juggling a tremendous amount and really holding their own in a variety of spaces. And that was just such a great inspiration to me. And I think they too, they saw that if I was working hard and I was smart and I was plugged into what they had as visions for their organizations, they were giving me every opportunity. So they were throwing me in the room with the big fish and letting me figure it out. And I think that's a lot of the reason that I've kind of gravitated towards these roles, and here I am.
What a great way to prepare for your role here in New Canaan at the Community Foundation. How did you come upon New Canaan, and how long have you been here?
My husband and I, since we have family in this area, wanted to come back up north and put down roots, and I knew I wanted to stay in the Community Foundation field. And my husband was supportive of that. So for at least a year, if not 18 months, I was really searching in the Northeast to figure out where would there be a community philanthropy role that I'd be happy with. So when I met the hiring committee here, it was a long line of past board leadership of the foundation, which said a lot about how much people care about the organization and the kind of community it was and how important this work was to them. And again, it felt like home when I walked around town and I took the train in, and it just sort of clicked. So it's been a really great experience. And I think the community, you never know until you get to a town what it's really going to be like. People were open arms welcoming and so excited to meet someone new and understand who I was and what about this role and where the foundation was headed. So it's been a great experience.
All right. For those who don't know what the New Canaan Community Foundation is, can you give me a 2-minute overview?
Sure. So we've been around since 1977. Started off as a volunteer-run organization. So we've actually only been a staffed organization for about 16, 17 years now.
And you have how many on the staff?
We are 4 in total. Okay. Mm-hmm. So we're lean and mean. We get a tremendous amount done. It's a great team, actually all women at the moment. And in our years, we've grown from doing kind of more discrete projects in town. So initially capital investments in organizations. Then we merged with the local United Way in 2009. That really expanded us into much more program and general operating support for nonprofits. And then over time, we've grown incrementally, but the last couple of years, we've really been focused on what I'd call community leadership work, which is very kind of jargony. It's really a community foundation term, but what it means is you're an organization within the community in partnership with donors who want to fund and support important things to them. You're talking with town leadership, nonprofit organizations, and just general residents to understand what in that environment could you help support. Is there a key issue that needs a little help or coordination? Can you convene people on an issue to make a bigger difference?
Well, you've been so helpful during this COVID-19 pandemic, and what I've learned about the New Canaan Community Foundation has been the response fund that you've built, and how it's really helped the community during this really difficult time. As a member of the board of the Chamber of Commerce, we were so fortunate to be able to ask for a grant there to keep things going, which in turn leads to helping the whole community in the businesses and the restaurants and so on. How did that come about? Obviously, the crisis of the pandemic, but you really hit it out of the park fast.
The speed of it was really important to us. So we knew as soon as the state and local mandates were coming down that we were going to be closing down. Even if it was, in the scheme of things, a shorter time than I think it's all turned out to be now in retrospect, it was going to have a big impact on local business, on individual residents, on the workforce, on childcare, on kids in the education system. So we really felt like it was important to move fast. So the board was behind it 100%. We launched the fund, I think, within 5 days of the stay-at-home orders. And we've just crossed the $500,000 fundraising mark, which is tremendous.
And that's just for the COVID response fund.
Just for the COVID response fund, which is tremendous. I mean, we really did not know at the get-go how the community would respond. And we have to be sensitive to the fact that many people in their own lives are facing challenges, so may not be able to give right now, and that's completely fine, and people are giving at all different levels. But we've been so heartened with the response, and we've been able to invest in the chamber and thereby local businesses and nonprofit members. We've invested a lot into food resources for folks in town and in neighboring communities. We've partnered with Health and Human Services to support specific families, even different projects like supporting the farmers market vendors. We've done things around violence prevention and intervention, because for many people, unfortunately, home is not a safe space. And so supporting individual adults and kids to have better support systems and access to important services, educational supports. We're now just launching into some childcare support in partnership with the Y to make sure that teachers in our public school system have the childcare that they need in this new hybrid system. And then also working with Health and Human Services to make sure individual families have access to those programs.
Wow,
So
you are really touching on all areas of the community. Yeah, that's
it's a
great.
lot. And I think, unfortunately, we don't know how long this will go on. I think, with a lot of folks have talked about this. This isn't like your typical natural disaster where it's over and then you can assess and focus on recovery. We've been in this long-term response phase, and we're hoping that we can turn the corner and get to recovery, but we're not quite there yet, unfortunately.
Well, it sounds like you've had a lot of women leadership in your life, and we're talking today with you because this is part of a program that we are celebrating the ratification of the 19th Amendment, the right for women to vote, 100-year anniversary. When was the first time you voted?
Oh gosh.
Do you remember the experience?
I think my first vote was absentee in college.
I think mine too, yeah.
And at the time, I just remember being huddled in like my tiny dorm and watching the returns on my computer.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a very connected experience. Everywhere I've lived now, though, I've voted, and pretty much always in person.
Good for you.
So voting in D.C. when I lived there, I've voted in New Canaan a couple of times already. Any opportunity, and I think once you do the first time, you can't turn away then.
That's right.
So I think that early engagement in voting is really important, because then you say, oh, that did feel really good, and I felt engaged, and I was much more informed on the issues and the candidates and so on. And so I'm not going to vote just in the national, I'm going to vote in the local, and I'm going to make a really big impact on the local level probably. So
that's good.
Yeah.
If you were being in the community back in the 1800s and 100 years ago, when this all was building up and the women were really fighting for their rights, would you be part of that?
I would hope so.
Yeah.
I'd hope so. If right now as a snapshot, as an example, and you see so much civic engagement happening right now in our country,
sure.
I hope that there's some parallel to the movements that came before us too.
Yeah, that's great. Is voting a civics right or a duty, do you think, for women or for everybody in the community?
I think so. I mean, we've clearly fought through history, and it's never been perfect. Access has never been perfect. It still isn't. But I think we've fought so hard to have that right, and that we, as much as sometimes you feel like a tiny little piece of the bigger picture, and could it really have an impact? I think things like the passing of the 19th Amendment show you what organizing can do, and how when people come together, you can move big change. So I do take it personally that it is a responsibility. And I think at the local levels where we really have opportunities to make a lot of change, you see that in New Canaan, the level of civic engagement here is really incredible. The number of volunteers that serve on nonprofit boards or town commissions, or just go out of their way to organize as a neighborhood committee or step up. I've seen it multiple times, even in just the 4 short years I've been here, step up to respond to an individual family need or a health crisis in the community. It doesn't have to have anything to do with an affiliation behind an organization, but people individually make that local difference. So I tie that kind of all together.
Well, that answers my next question, which is, what is so special about New Canaan to you?
I do think there is some weird secret sauce here. You feel it when you get here, that you feel a responsibility to be part of this town. And I do actually love that seems to be part of the messaging as soon as you get here, because then you say, oh, okay, I get that it's just, I can't just live here in my own little pod, even as much as we might be in the pandemic at the moment, that you're part of a neighborhood. And you're responsible for each other and the organizations in town and what this place is like for future generations.
In your role, you obviously have visibility on a lot of the town and have direct communication with some of the leadership, which makes it a little bit easier for you to understand how this place works. But I do agree with you, the communication is key. Getting access to the leadership is not that hard. I think that's the beauty of your role. I think people have access to you, and they can learn a lot about what goes on in the community. What do you think some of the traditions in New Canaan, obviously coming back to the New England area or the Northeast, there's a lot more of the tradition. Tell us what you like about New Canaan and some of their traditions.
I mean, I think it's remarkable that there's a great newcomers club here. That's something my husband and I took advantage of right away. That's part of the community and kind of welcoming people in. And that, clubs like that really help with the traditions. I had no idea what paddle tennis was before I've got here, but I've tried it out.
Good, that's what I like to hear.
And then, I think there are fun holiday traditions, especially in the winter months, with the God's Acre Christmas caroling and the lights that the Chamber does such a tremendous job turning our downtown into this really magical place every year. I think you can feel it and see it, in particular during times of year like that.
Lauren, when you're not running the New Canaan Community Foundation, what do you like to do for yourself, with your family, or just to chill?
We are big outdoors people and big hikers. So every weekend, barring any weather issues, we're outside, and that's year round. So even in the winter, we love getting out, just bundling up, going hiking, and it's great. I mean, there's so many resources right here in town, things like the land trust properties if we really don't want to go far, and then there are so many things within driving distance. So we're really outside as much as possible.
That's great. My last question is, what would you tell your younger self? Is there any advice that you wish you had maybe received when you were younger that you might offer to young people today?
I think a lot of people would say this looking back, just breathe, right? Like, it's going to be fine. Whatever you think is a big deal at that point in time, it's going to be
maybe
fine.
Slow down a little.
Slow down a little, yeah. Slow down, breathe, kind of just appreciate where you're at. There's a lot of struggle to kind of get to the next thing always. It doesn't have to be like that. You'll get there eventually anyway. And I think too, I think I was quieter as a child, and there's a lot in our culture that focuses on the loud and the in your face. And I think there are roles for people who are quieter and compassionate and empathetic, and that goes for women leaders, that goes for male leaders, but I think there's a role for that in our community and in our culture and in leadership. And I think if I knew that as a younger girl, that would have given me a little more solace, a little more grounding to feel like I was going to have a place in the world.
What's the best advice anyone ever gave you?
Oh, that's a good question. I think, I don't know if anyone said it in so many words, but just that being nice is good. That's enough in some instances. I remember, this is one kind of tiny story that sticks out in my mind. When I graduated from elementary school, they do those great like pomp and circumstance kind of things, even when it's elementary school and you're going on to middle school, and they give out little awards. And I remember there was a secret award that I didn't know about that I was getting, and it was like the Congeniality Award or something like that, or the Generosity Award. And it was myself, and it was a little boy who was also pretty quiet. But we didn't know that teachers had taken notice that we were nice to our classmates, that we were helpful. And I didn't really think it was such a big deal until I saw my family, who had kind of snuck into the award ceremony, and my parents were just so proud and tearful. And I thought that was sort of when I realized that my parents cared so much about that oh, okay, it's maybe not everyone's like that, or it is really important. And so I think I think fostering that in kids and just in the way, even as adults, that we lead and serve in the community is just really important.
Well, Lauren, thank you so much for being here. It's so important what you do here in the community. The New Canaan Community Foundation plays a critical role in how we as a community are successful, and we thank you for all you do, and thanks for being here today.
Thank you.